That's the statue of Saint Francis. We got it recently from our pilgrimage to Italy. Some of us had gone there earlier this year. And many of you must have heard about him. I had not actually. When I came on the path before I came, shortly before I came, I heard a little bit, read in some newspaper articles about him. But 3rd or 4th of October is said to be when he left his body, at close to midnight. And he lived in the 12th century, so long time ago. But some interesting things about his life is, Paramhans Yogananda ji, our guru, he said that he considered Saint Francis his patron saint. Now, a patron saint is like how in India we have an Ishta Devta or Kul Devta or a guru for the family who oversees the work, oversees all aspects of the family. In Christian tradition, that's called a patron saint. He who can, you have any troubleshooter, you can pray to him for different things, and he's like the guardian angel, you might say. And a very beautiful concept. And today in the reading, from the Gita, there's a very interesting point Yogananda ji made in his dictation to Swami Kriyananda ji. Yogananda ji said, people in today's times, he says, they do not believe in angels, guardian angels, fairies. In India, we would say Devi, Devta. And he says they are mistaken. He says, my guru said fairies exist. And it was very interesting for me to think of Sri Yukteswar ji, who is so stern, maybe having a discussion about fairies with Yogananda ji, or telling him. But it makes a lot of sense, friends. For example, recently we were thinking how to beautify our own garden. And somebody had the thought that let's plant small herbs on our terrace, which is not utilized yet. And by planting those herbs, we will invite the Devis and Devtas and the fairies who oversee those herbs. And, it's very interesting. I actually know a lady in Pashan who was our neighbor for many years who was so close to our path, and she would see Swamiji. And one day she told me, she said, everything is so wonderful, but I am not able to come to terms with the concept of a guru, a human person being my guru. And I said, well, we all have to, go past that question one way or the other in our own time. And I said, don't worry about it. I said, but I see that you are so much connected to nature. And then she very, shyly revealed, she said, actually, I can speak to flowers. And then I said, but then you must understand that the same spirit has to be taken to the next level. She said, actually, I can make flowers, turn in my direction. I can talk to them. I know what exactly they need and such. And it was so beautiful to get a testimony. She's a professor, to know these things. And it also happens with children. Sometimes they are in tune. And, even if we don't see it, which Kriyananda ji said is the case with most people, he says, don't we all feel it? Once, this journalist asked Mahatma Gandhi, the father of our nation, whose birthday was on 2nd of October, he said, you're a politician. How can you believe in things like love, universal love, non-violence? Why do you talk too much about them? And don't you see it's just a philosophy which may not work in politics? And Gandhiji's reply was, he said, if something can move me to tears, he said, I think that has power. Love, maternal love, brotherly love, friendly love, all kind of love is a power. Just because it is not seen does not mean we dismiss it. What is left if we dismiss it? Was his way of answering that. What is left in your journalism or my politics if we dismiss? Basically, you become a politician to serve people. Business, same thing. And let me take this verse today from the Gita, which is from the 2nd chapter, Nature of Right Action, 1 verse 46. To the knower of Brahman, the Supreme Spirit, the Vedas are of no more use than a well when the land all around one is in flood. And Kriyananda ji makes the point, he says, why Vedas? He says, because of course this is the Gita, and the Vedas in the highest age, when they were, he says, first received. For the longest time, he says, they were not written down because they were received, and that is how people lived. It was like how we go about our lives today. We are actually in a cycle of time called Dwapar Yuga. It has just begun. We have come out of a dark age. If you read history, it's very clear we've come out of a dark age, and we are just moving into an age of energy which is manifesting around us. Yogananda ji said, another 2,400 years, and this age will end. We will enter another age of 3,600 years, where he says man's psychic powers will be very high. And finally, for 4,800 years, we will enter into Satya Yuga. So Swami makes the point that in Satya Yuga, what guides our life? He says simple intuition. And in intuition, the whole civilization knows how to live. And those codes of conduct is what in the lower ages becomes the written form of the Vedas. And he says at that time, man does not have to be told how to live. Politicians, I mean, I don't know if politics exists at that time, but coming from that high age, a politician knows that he or people know that we are electing him because he will take care of us. And he understands or she understands totally that this is what I was born for. Somebody once asked Kriyanandaji, how can you be so kind? How could you spend just 3.5 years with Yoganandaji? Which he did in the last stage of Master's life. And they said, how do you know so much about him? He wrote 150 books. I see some new faces over here, so I'm relating those facts. And Swamiji said, well, what else would I do? And then he said, I was born for that. I was made for that. This is how I was made, he said actually. And it is so interesting because they're having tea and he's just saying, he says, this is how I was made. That in the grand scheme of things, which again, is there a grand scheme of things? We don't know, but let's think about it. Our galaxy, and we're all such intelligent, aware people, we have awareness. We know, for example, right now we are not sleeping, I hope. And we are, conscious. Kriyanandaji said that feeling of I am aware and conscious, he says, is part of a much bigger reality from which manifests our entire universe. How big is our universe? Our galaxy has 100 billion stars, of which the sun is one of them. And the time that light takes to travel from one end of our galaxy to the other is 1 lakh years. That is one galaxy. Kriyanandaji says today astronomers have found by the present day telescopes 200 billion galaxies, each with over 100 billion stars like our sun, and think of the space in between them, and this is just the beginning of making good telescopes. So are we alone in this universe? No, but we know that uniquely we are all very unique. And Swami says absolutely. He says, as far as you are concerned, he says, you are verily the center of the universe because you don't care what's happening on the moon. Your life, your breakfast, your meditation, everything has to concern to you. But he says, when we expand our awareness, and what the Vedas was saying that if you live by this way, you will be happy. There's a story from St. Francis' life where towards the end of his life, he lived a short life. I think mid-40s he passed away. And at that time, his eyes contracted an illness, where he could not open them and he was turning blind. So one night he was walking alone on a road and he was a monk. He had given up everything. I'll come to the stories of his life after this particular story. But he was walking in the night and an old woman who was a beggar, she heard somebody passing by and she said, she asked for alms. And she couldn't see that this man is already in tattered clothes himself and not carrying any money. But St. Francis heard her and he said, what can I give her? The only thing he had in his hand was a Bible, which at that time was a very precious commodity in the 12th century. Books were not easy to find. And he took the Bible and he gave it to her and he says, Mother, this is a well-bound Bible. You will get a few coins for this. So he gave it to her and she thanked him and he moved ahead. But as he moved ahead, this thought came to him. He said, my goodness, I have given the word of God away. And he apologized to God. He said, I'm sorry, I've given your word away. And Kriyanandaji relates. He says he instantly heard an inner voice. And that voice said, Francis, my word is in your heart. Other people relate the story as saying that God whispered to him, Francis, you have become my word. And that is the point, that why were the Vedas written? Because mankind was descending, they could not remember the codes of conduct. It comes down further where in the Vedas, for example, Kriyanandaji used to say very humorously, he says there are mantras which if you chant, you'll get the right wife. If you chant the proper mantras, your crops will succeed. You can find a job. There are mantras which have power. Mantras are words which have power. There are prayers in all languages actually, which can be, said and a certain benefit received. And one would think that's not right. But think of it, friends, from a descending point of view, when man is beginning to forget even the existence of God or a reality, or like we said, fairies and angels. So the saints were so generous, and Swami says God himself was so generous that he says, lest it all go to man's ego and cause his downfall, let me introduce that if he uses the name of God or a certain Devi or Devta or angel, because actually he said, as we go up and down in incarnation, spiritual evolution, when a soul has very little ego left, sometimes they take on that role of being an angel. And but Swami says it's very tricky. He says, because you may approach the angel for a very particular thing once you know it can give you that. And he says the angel does deliver. Now it's good on one level as long as you understand that an angel is delivering it. But he says it's not very good for a long-term thing for the angel, because the angel still has ego. And it may say, oh, pray more often to me. Come more often to me. And there are deities like that in India. Some temples are very rich, because it is known that if you go there and you pray for something, you will get it. But Kriyanandaji then asks this question, which is actually Krishna's exhortation as he's relating this verse. How much more do you want? Rain, crops, wife, husband, job, life, death, life, children, and again he says that continues. But he says, why? That is the way of the ego. I want this. Can I please possess this? Kriyanandaji says, Krishna on the other hand, and all saints are saying, do you want to possess this Bible, or do you want to become the Word? Do you want to possess, be the king of this world, which people do become, and they are sometimes not happy. Richest men in the world often are not happy. Do you want to possess this, or the alternative is, do you want to become this? And that becoming is a state of offering, is a state which St. Francis went through. And let me relate some stories about his life. Kriyanandaji compares, God realization versus our prayers for things which are answered. He says it's like taking a teaspoon of soil when you are being offered the kingdom. And I meditated on that. That's a very wide comparison. A teaspoon of soil. Why? Because I think sometimes we are afraid to have the kingdom. See, the natural thought will come, my goodness, I'll have to run the kingdom. Or God knows how far I'll be placed in my own kingdom. But again, it's like you're thinking of yourself as a person, as a body, you're thinking of separation. Whereas Christ was telling St. Francis, see, another very beautiful quality of saints is they are childlike, they are simple. Somebody once asked Kriyanandaji, it was in Pune, sir, how did God create these billions of galaxies? And you would think Swami would open one of the scriptural texts mentally and start relating. Swami's answer was, you see, God is childlike. In his childlike simplicity, he manifested himself in this universe. Any other questions? And I was like, because it had come from a very intellectual mind that, how does God create this galaxy? And he says, because he's childlike. And on a very simple level, we have to do our own homework. I often tell people, here is a trailer. Go home and stretch the Vedas and the scriptures more, and let's come up with more answers, because we have to ask individually. But my own thought was, when I was a child, I never had to work for anything. I would just ask my mother, oh, can I have this? Can you make gajar ka halwa? Can you buy me a football on my birthday? Which is today, actually. It was in Pune. My mom got me a birthday bought football many years ago. So they're like, can you get me this? And they say, oh, yes, here you are. If the choice, if what we're asking is right, we get it. So how does one reach that stage of childlike simplicity? Also, you see the same thing is manifested in the life of Kriyanandaji. He was very childlike. And Swami says, not childish, childlike. He says, when you're childish, he says, there's nothing, it's immaturity. But to be childlike, he says, with being childlike comes a power The very God, it's like, you're not alone as a child. Your parents are with you. Your older brother is with you. So when we are in that state, Swamiji says a great power flows through us. And that is the very interesting thing to see in the life of St. Francis, that towards the end of his life, they say he had received, by the way, he was the first known saint in Christianity who received the stigmata of Christ. Christ, when he was crucified on the cross, it was a very unfortunate incident, but nails were sent through his hands and feet, and a sharp spear was put into his chest. And St. Francis, as he was praying again and again to Christ, he received those stigmata in the last couple years of his life. And I was reading an extract where they said that he was so tired in the body that he sat on a donkey to be carried from monastery to monastery. And at that time they used to take him through villages, and he was so absorbed in bliss and often in the pain of these stigmata that they say that people just often touching the donkey or his clothes or sometimes his hands were instantly getting healed, but he was not at all concerned. He had just covered his head. He was like, whatever is happening, he was not bothered about it. But there was this great power that was flowing through him. But now let's go back, not too much, but just 20 years back in St. Francis's life. Because you see, Master said, everyone who takes these teachings of Kriya seriously can become a saint in this life. He says you can become Jivan Muktas. So the St. Francis' life is more or less like that. He, when he was growing up, was the son of the wealthiest cloth merchant in Assisi, a city in Italy. And being the son of a wealthy merchant, you have many friends, you're often partying and, going out. He was treating his friends to many things. And when asked what he wants to do in life, what is his goal in life, he said, I want to go to war and win name and fame for my country. And he says, if I'm very famous, I'll probably get a good bride because she will know me as I'm a popular knight. So, you would think very ordinary person, ordinary desires, but a lot of zest, they say. He was always the leader in his group, and he had a lot of zest and very charitable. He would invite friends just to have fun, and they would sing in the night. But then it came to a point where he was not very happy. And one time there was a war, dark ages those were, there was a war with the neighboring village, small town, and he went to war, but unfortunately was captured, imprisoned, and tortured. And he saw many other people, his friends, who were killed in the process, tortured. And this happened for 1 year. And he later related to his friends and family when they asked him, because he came a very transformed person, they asked him what happened. And he said, I saw the helplessness of friends, family, my father's money, power, my own power. He says, I was a slave to somebody for 1 year. What gave him hope in that 1 year was, however, he found somebody had carried a small Bible in their pocket, and he found those phrases extremely consoling, and he, in his own translation, helped other people understand those phrases. So when he came back, he started being more generous and helping people with his money, started giving poor people cloth, and he was very happy, finding beggars, handing them money. Then he found lepers who at that time used to be outcasted. They had a separate village. Actually, very unfortunately, they used to carry a bell. So they used to ring a bell as they used to come into the village, and people they would move away and such. So he started going to the leper communities and started bandaging them, healing them, helping them. But one day, despite all of this, he was still not happy. And please relate to all these steps. This happens, in our life or other people's lives that we study. And then he was weeping one day, and he went for a long walk, and he was weeping in a cave and praying to Christ as he knew him through the Bible. He says, why am I not happy? I'm helping people. I've left my friends. My family doesn't understand me. Why am I not happy? And he heard this answer in his heart. Because, Francis, you don't have me. And then he asked that voice, he said, how can I find you? He said, you can come here and pray to me. And he says, now go and rebuild my church. Which is to say, there was an old church in his village, and he thought he has to build that church. Actually, he was in that church at that time, so he rebuilt that church. He found a lot of joy. But then he says that he in time understood the church of God is not a church, physical church alone. It is the hearts, his own heart and the hearts of all people. And from there, Yogananda ji said, his daily communication with God. What can I do for you, Lord? What kind of church do you want me to make? he started monasteries for men. He started monasteries for women. He was so magnetic. Master says he was called the thief of hearts. They say when he would come to the village, people would say, "Oh, the thief has come. Beware of your young sons." Because he would say things and people would start leaving home. And so then families started doing that. And then Master says he had to start what is called the third order. He had to tell families that God doesn't expect you to be in a monastery. Some people, yes, it's good for them. But you can be right where you are and practice these principles and love God. And Master says his power was great. It was not just theory he was giving. One time he went then from village to village. And once he went to a village where he was supposed to give a big talk, and they arranged at that time, the way to give a talk was not through a mic, of course, but one of his brother monks arranged a big box in the village square. And they started beating the drum that come and listen to the great Saint Francis, and they beat, and people said, "Oh, we are busy today, no." And so here he was standing alone, and then his brother was very embarrassed that they could not promote him well or something. And then Saint Francis said, "It's okay." He says, "Why don't you be here while I go and give a sermon to our sister birds?" And he went to a tree nearby, and all the birds were sitting over there, and he gave a sermon to them. They say that the birds bowed before him. They came and sat around him. He told them, God gives you food every day. He has allowed you to fly. He has given you sweet voices. Don't just talk among yourselves. Sing to him. Thank him. And likewise, Master said that he had a very great power, where once there was a wolf, at that time, which was disturbing the people in a particular village called Gubbio, which is not very far from Assisi. And St. Francis had to go to another place, and he told his fellow monk, he says, "Let's go through Gubbio." And he said, "Brother, we don't want to go through Gubbio. There's the wolf, the great wolf is there." And he says, "No, let's go." And as they were going, the villagers were all in sticks and sitting outside their house with axes and knives. And they said that, everything has become so terror-struck. We are terror-struck. He has eaten some of our people, this wolf. And St. Francis says, "Let me go and meet him." And they said, "Don't go, don't, please. He's very big." He was very big. Actually, there's a life-size statue of that wolf in the same village to this day. There he is, actually. The wolf is now sitting next to him in the statue. So the story goes that St. Francis went through that village, and the wolf saw him. And the wolf came to attack him. And St. Francis was quietly standing. And then he said, "They tell me that you have committed a sin of eating man's highest creation." And he says, "That was not given to you." He says, "You can kill in your own species." But he says, "How dare you kill man?" And the wolf, kind of was confused, and he says, "That was not right. You transgressed the law of nature." And then the wolf said, "But, I'm afraid now." He could actually speak with animals. So St. Francis says, "I'll go back to the village and tell them not to beat you or kill you, but you have to promise you will not kill anybody." And they say that the wolf raised his right paw to shake hands with St. Francis, and they shook hands, and he walked into the village. This is history. He walked into the village with the wolf, and he made the wolf apologize. And he was saying, "This wolf will now not kill anybody." And the wolf was nodding. But he says, "But what will he eat?" He says, "I want all of you to feed him." The villagers said, "Happily, every day we'll feed him." And they say that for 2 more years, the wolf every day came on a door, and he put his paw and knocked, and people opened, and they gave him food. And he would roam in the streets with children. And it so happened that St. Francis went to Gubbio only twice in his life. This was the second time, once when he was a child. And then 2 years later, the wolf passed away. Another 1 year later, St. Francis passed away. And people were so sad that the wolf died. They made a statue in the center of the village, and they said, "Because of this wolf, we were remembering St. Francis." And actually, if you read in the scriptures, in the Vedas of yoga, this power comes by perfecting ahimsa. When we do not want to harm anything in creation, and that comes not by our power, that comes by God's grace, by the grace of Guru, and Christ was his Guru. Then Yogananda ji said that power comes, and even wild animals are tamed, they become pet in our presence. And I'd like to share this one final story, because see friends, Satya Yuga, people don't even need books. It's much easier. But of course, they must have done all the good karma. You don't reach there by chance. Once Kriyanandaji asked Yogananda, if I just hang around for a few more 1,000 years or keep praying to be reincarnated, will I be born in Satyayuga? Can people be born in Satyayuga? And Master says, oh, no, no, no. He says, after death in this life, you go to a planet or a place which is just like the vibrations or consciousness you have lived with and put out, so that you can take the next higher step. He says, you won't make that leap from Dwapara into Satyayuga. But when we realize God, when we find enlightenment, that state is actually higher than Satyayuga. It is the state of, going past these tendencies altogether. But it is very hard. Master says it was very hard in Kali Yuga and is equally hard right now. Hard in today's moment, not because of lack of availability of teachings, but because of confusion outside, because of too many distractions and thoughts. And Master says that in these times, the example of the life of a saint is very, very beneficial to us. We can draw from it, and their grace can come to us. And so as we go about practicing these things, I would like to bring our attention back to how we can model our life after these things, after our line of gurus. I want to read a few lines, very beautiful, from this explanation part of this verse. Kriyanandaji says, those who sincerely want him ask for nothing in return, but pray selflessly only for his love. What Krishna is saying then is, seek the direct experience of God. Don't be satisfied with anything less. As Christ said also, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things shall be added unto you. And towards the end of St. Francis's brief life, Christ, Master says, used to come to him every day to console him. And especially in his early part, St. Francis had this thought, should I just seclude or remain in my communion with God, or does God want me to go out? And he says that prayer was answered to him by two of his disciples, two of them, and the prayer was, he wants you to do both, but go out, because people don't know about these things. And he says, he wants you to use you as a channel. And so Master said that towards the end of his life, Christ used to come in flesh every night and console St. Francis. And that is what we are seeking. Kriyanandaji says, don't think of it as just an event that happened in his life. I was recently in Italy and somebody was sharing a very intimate story. She said, I was just cooking food one day and I felt a very strong motherly presence in my kitchen. And she said, it was like I intuitively knew this has to be Divine Mother. And she said, I felt she's in my room. And of course she turned around. There was no obvious visible presence, but she said, my heart was so uplifted that I kept singing and I started playing Divine Mother's chants. And she said, we were scheduled for tea with Swamiji at 4 p.m. that evening. And she said, when we went for tea, she says, Swami's face was suffused with bliss. And he says, I don't know why, I just want to sing. I'm so grateful to Divine Mother, he was saying. I don't know why, but today I'm so grateful to Divine Mother. And she said, I didn't ask him much, but she said, I think Divine Mother visited our Swami that day. So why not? Look at his life. He gave so much. And Master says, every aspect of your life will be a sacrifice for God, that you will have nothing of it, including death, which if you study his death is very intriguing. He didn't get to, die the way one would want to die. Yogi would want to go. Master says, I would want to leave my life with my boots intact, with my boots on. And Kriyanandaji was on the computer, writing an email, replying to something, and then, he just felt that, okay, this is it. And somebody asked him, do you want me to make this for breakfast? And Swami says, anything. That was his last word, anything. And that is how his life was. Anything for God. And so let's take this into our lives, into our daily life, especially in this week of St. Francis. Let's try to draw his blessings. How can we model in that fashion? And how can we serve as channels? Because remember, life is only so short. St. Francis also, 20 years. What has to happen? He met the Pope, he did things, established the work, and to this day it is running. But it all has to happen in that very short period. God bless you.